Good afternoon, everyone. Please come on in and sit down. Good morning, good afternoon. Hanmadaki Epi, Dayan Wachiakapi, Dayan Yahipi. Hello, my relatives. It's good to see you. Welcome. I want to thank our language teachers, Shoshoka Duta and Nicole Subala, for helping us learn these Dakota words. I'm Amanda Hunt, Head of Public Engagement, Learning, and Impact here at the Walker Art Center, and we are thrilled to have you all here today to celebrate the opening of Dyani White Hawk Love Language. Congratulations to Siri Engberg and Tara Hogue, co-curators of this excellent show. So proud of you. And to you, Dyani, if you can hear me backstage. Today, we're taking our time to explore critical ideas with a longer format, and so we invite you all to come and go as you please. Grab a coffee, grab a tea, take a break, come back. We just want to spend time together in an extended format because that's what this show requires, so thank you. I want to thank all of my Walker and Peli colleagues as well for their generous work to make all of these elements possible. And who will be programming this space in the exhibition for the next 4 months. Megan, Ugi, Ikwe, Janine, Sophia, and Lena as well, especially. Thank you all for the support. I would like to welcome our Indigenous elders, leaders, and community members who have joined us today. We acknowledge that here in Minnesota Makoche, we are gathered today on Dakota and Ojibwe land. And as part of this ongoing work, Walker staff and trustees are in active relationships, partnerships, and dialogue with members of Indigenous communities, citizens of Native nations, and the tribes that share geography with Minnesota. Together, we are working toward making a strong and healthy future for artists, the arts, and this place. I would now like to read the exhibition acknowledgement written by Love Language co-curator Tara Hogue, which is part of this exhibition on its walls and in the pages of the catalog. The exhibition Dyani White Hawk Love Language is launched on the Great Plains, first in the Dakota and Ojibwe homelands of Minnesota Makoche, Dyani White Hawk's home state, and then in Treaty 6 territory and the Métis homeland in the province of Saskatchewan. The history of the Great Plains, stretching across what is now the US-Canada border, reflect a rich tapestry of interconnected trade, kinship, and spiritual networks sustained by Indigenous nations long before settlement. The imposition of a border in the 19th century disrupted these networks, separating communities like the Oceti-Sakowin cultural group, 7 Council Fires, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations, whose territories long predate national boundaries. In the United States, treaties were made and broken. Indigenous lands were appropriated through acts such as the Homestead Act of 1862, and removal policies displaced entire communities. In Canada, the signing of treaties like Treaty 6 reflected First Nations leaders' vision for coexistence and self-determination, but subsequent policies such as the Indian Act of 1876 and the pass system undermined these agreements, resulting in profound dispossession and loss of autonomy. Despite these histories of colonization, Indigenous nations continue to assert their presence and sovereignty across borders. Today, both Minneapolis and Saskatoon are home to significant Indigenous populations, each city serving as a vital hub for diverse nations. The Walker Art Center and Ramey Modern recognize that the work of building respectful relationships with Indigenous artists, audiences, and communities is inherently tied to acknowledging these layered histories and the resilience of Indigenous peoples. This work is essential and must be ongoing. Through this partnership, we aim to contribute to these efforts, recognizing the history and continued vitality of the Oceti-Sakowin peoples and other Indigenous nations whose connections to these lands transcend colonial borders. Now it is my pleasure to acknowledge the generous supporters of this exhibition, some of whom are joining us today. Thank you to our ASL interpreters, Angela especially, for slowing me down for this portion. On behalf of the Walker and our partner Ramey Modern, we are grateful to have received funding from the Henry Luce Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, Akio Tagawa, the Canada Council for the Arts, and Girlfriend Fund. For their support of the Walkers' presentation in Minneapolis, we are grateful to lead sponsor Thrivent, supporting sponsor the Shakopee Bettawakawantuan Sioux community, honorary trustee Bruce Atwater and his wife Martha, Louis Baskerville, Mary C. Dolan and the Longview Foundation, Jennifer Martin and the Martin and Brown Foundation, Walker trustee John Whaley, his wife Annette, and the Whaley Foundation, Grand Casino Mille Lacs and Grand Casino Hinckley, Jody and Mike Wallig, Barry Bow Mills, and our media partner, Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine. We would also like to share today, on this day of learning and scholarship, that our friends Shoshoka Duta and the Dakota Iapi Okokichie, the Dakota Language Society, have created the John Reynolds Dakota Language Scholarship Fund. This fund honors the life and the legacy of their founding board member and the late Shanshoa Mani, John Reynolds. John's love for the language guided his work as a teacher and a lifelong learner and an organizer. Although he is no longer with us, his dedication continues to light the path forward. To carry on his legacy, the Dakota Language Society is proud to partner with John's family, especially his sister Dyani White Hawk, to create this language learning fund. This scholarship will support students and community members who share John's commitment to learning, teaching, and living the Dakota language. Through this fund, they honor his memory and ensure that his dream of a thriving Dakota-speaking community continues for generations to come. Please refer to your program notes for more information or to donate. Thank you again for joining us for the opening of Dyani White Hawk Love Language. If you haven't seen the exhibition yet, it's gonna blow your mind. For today's special panel, Dyani has invited writer and curator Candice Hopkins to moderate an incredible discussion between the artist herself, artist and curator Keith BraveHeart, exhibition catalog contributors Heather Ahtone and Joyce Tsai. Please read more about each of these incredible people in your program notes. And now, join me in welcoming them all to the stage.
Hi, everyone. My name is Candice Hopkins, and Dyani's asked me to moderate this conversation between us. And I say that I am humbly here. I'm not from this land or territory. I come from Yukon, Canada. I'm a citizen of Carcross, Tagish First Nation. But I also want to share the main times I've sat on this stage, which is exactly 3, I believe, is always because Dyani invited me. So thank you. I wanted to share, inspired first by Dyani's mom's words last night, a little bit of a story, if that's okay. I think it was 2014 maybe, or 2015, and I was trying really hard to convince Dyani to take my job at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, which was as senior curator. Dyani at the time was doing amazing work here at All My Relations Gallery. She was also a mom. She was also an artist. She was also a community member. And I thought that this was the perfect solution to the fact that I had to move to Europe for another job. So I just thought, okay, Dyani can come, she can bring her family. I didn't win that conversation or that negotiation because Dyani told me, and this I think was one of the most important decisions of your life, that you wanted to take the chance to become a full-time artist. And I think we're all here and we're all grateful because you made that decision and your family supported you in that. So thank you. And a big part of that, as Dyani's mom shared last night, is that you asked them if you could all live together to help with that transition. And of course they said yes. So I first met Dyani around that time. She invited me here. She was a McKnight Fellow. And she also invited me to write about her work. And I found the essay from 2015. And I wanted to read some of the words because I think that they still hold true. And I think that they'll hold true, I think, in the things that we want to talk about in relation to Dyani's work. So if you'll listen to these words, I want to share them with you now. So, Dyani White Hawk's paintings oftentimes appear stitched together. These threads, both representational and metaphorical, are sometimes loose, perhaps tenuous, and at other times they're stretched taut. And the brushwork in her paintings has replicated quill work, it's replicated beadwork, and the woven designs of textiles. And at the time, I thought that this act of stitching, of piercing, of binding different elements together via paint and printmaking and now beads draws attention to her personal history, what she described then at the time as a kind of careful balancing act of often competing value systems and aesthetics. And the competing value systems that you were speaking about, and I think still come forward in your work, are those of so-called modern and Native American art, which sometimes existed as though they were in parallel universes. And I think in Dyani's work, she makes them have a conversation. So these practices, as she's quick to point out, are not mutually exclusive. They're actually contingent, they're deeply entangled, and they're also relational, even when that art history with a capital A tried to imply that they aren't. And it was while White Hawk was a graduate student at the University of Madison that she started to see relationships between Native and modern art, and one that found her way into her recent paintings at that time, and this is 2015. She was thinking about, for example, the incredible weavings that are done on Navajo Nation, and how there were these similarities between that and color field painters like Mark Rothko, and indeed, he was looking at these weavings. And so while Dyani received her formal education in tribal schools, followed by an undergraduate degree at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, it was with her move to Madison that she was fully thrust into Western art history and practices. And it's when these congruencies began to reveal themselves. So you described your work at that time as a mix of modern abstract painting and Lakota symbols. And I was thinking about this print that you titled Trust and Loss. And in that print, I think that there was a distinction made between both. And I think that distinction is entirely apparent now. And while, and this is my thoughts at the time, while a Lakota symbol might appear abstract to those outside of Lakota culture, from inside, it's of course deeply resonant and meaningful. It's a language unto itself. But I think it's in this gap, it's at this sometimes distance that is created between cultures and histories where your work actually oscillates. And that's where it gains its power. And in certain works, the gap is so wide, I think deliberately so, that you could lose yourself in it. And in others, it's so slim that you can barely see it. But I think that gap is generative, because it's not about what is represented as much as also what is not there. At the time, you had sections and designs that replicated porcupine quill work that were deliberately left without color. You had talked about how lost land plots are a way to call attention to the trust relationship, and that's in quotes, scare quotes, that's meant to exist between the federal government and tribal nations with regards to land, and we know how many times that's been broken. And you said about this work called Trust and Loss at the time, you said this piece speaks to the loss of culture that's inherent with the loss of land. So that's why land's so important to all of us, because it stops that loss and it helps heal. So I wanted to talk about, and I think we all want to talk about, how in many ways your paintings challenge these kinds of gaps in art history. And I think true to your ideology, perhaps to Lakota ideology, this challenge is found in beauty and it's found in tradition. And it's also found in love, as you see in this exhibition. So one thing I wanted to conclude with is, as a way of introducing our conversation, that your painted lines are a reminder of how stitches are also sutures. They're the threads that close up wounds. And I think with that, we need to acknowledge those wounds. And I think your works also do something else. They perhaps take a less obvious path. They expose sometimes subtle injustices. They can expose perilous biases that are lodged within art history. But I think this show's doing something else. It's kind of done away with some of that work because instead it's a celebration of Lakota ideology. It's a celebration of Lakota beauty. It's a celebration of Lakota values that has never happened in this museum before. And so I think that is pretty remarkable. And that's my first question for Dyani. Is what I witnessed last night was extraordinary. You know, the words of elders are obviously the words that guide us, especially those elders. And I want to make the case, and I think we've all experienced this already, that this is not simply an exhibition. You heard already in the introduction that language training has taken place. There's, I think, a genuine sense that exhibitions aren't just a place to gather knowledge, but they're actually a place of healing some of these senses of injustice. So Dyani, I wanted to ask, how is this exhibition more than an exhibition for you?
Oh, no small feat to begin with. But this is why I invited each of these people and why our panel is going to be a little bit longer today, because I'm really grateful that each of these four brilliant and generous people were willing to come and share space with me today. I value each of you, and Candice, I've valued your voice and your intellect and your heart and your work for many years. And so I'm just grateful that you continue to say yes. So thank you for being here. I'm gonna do my best. I'm already feeling really emotional, so I'm gonna move through it as best as I can. But last night I was driving back. I stayed till midnight. I shut it down because there was two amazing musical performances that were on the 8th floor that were really special. Our friend Faisal came out and DJ'd all the way from Madison, fellow photography professor at UW-Madison, and Joe Rainey is an Ojibwe musician and performer, was here. And so we listened to music till it was done, and I drove home, and I felt like I finally understood the definition of the word surreal. Last night was I'm trying. Last night was I guess I didn't even understand we could dream towards things like last night. And to be so profoundly supported by family and community, by people within my own tribe, and by my made native relatives beyond that, friends, by the Walker staff, just the extent of the people that gathered last night and the tremendous amount of joy that was felt, and to have what was a very quote unquote normal kind of celebration for us within our own communities. Like it's just cultural protocol. It's how we do things. It's how we honor one another. It's how we exist. And I know those things. You know those things. We know those things. And it's what inspires all of our work, because it's what guides us as human beings. But we can talk about it all day long with curators and in public talks, and try to do our best to explain to people, this is what I'm drawing from, this is who I am, this is where the work comes from. But that's still an abstract concept unless you've been adjacent to or invited in, or had a moment of lived experience in and with Native people. And so to be able to have that moment last night with everybody here at the exhibition, to open it the way that we would, to do it right according to our own cultural protocols, that is the work. You know, for me, the work that I've been doing, the artwork that I've been making, oftentimes I'm working really hard to create pieces that offer opportunities for conversation, that offer opportunities for dialogue, that offer us opportunities to think about how we've been taught what the art world is, and how we can choose to look at what we've been told the models are, or that we exist within, and how we get to choose what we want those to look like going forward, you know. And so it's about presenting over and over and over again the strong legacies of Indigenous artists, of Native people, of the ways that we've contributed and shaped and molded not only art history on this continent, but the land itself and our relationships with one another within it, and centering those legacies and pointing to the importance of those, so that hopefully past this exhibition, as people are writing new texts and as people are curating exhibitions going forward, that starts to shift and tells a more honest story of our national history and of our global history. So it's more than an exhibition, because it's bigger than just, I'm so honored and excited that the work is hanging and that people get to see it. And it's such a treat for me to see 15 years of the work collected. But the work is beyond that for me. The work is about shaping healthier, more honest futures. And part of that is making sure that our communities are an ongoing, valued part of that national dialogue.
Yeah, thank you, Dyani. This leads perfectly into a quote I want to share from Heather Ahtone when we met the other week to talk about what we were going to talk about. And it's just such a beautiful line, Heather. So, but I know you have lots to say about this, because this gets into the content of the work. So you said, we are always abstracting, and this is how we bring our present into the future. And I know you were talking about Dyani, but you were talking about what Native artists and cultural workers have always done. So, and I know that this is deeply part of your work as a curator and as an exhibition maker and as a knowledge producer. And I wondered if you would be interested in sharing more about your thoughts on not only how Dyani's work is a kind of form of that abstraction, but cultural abstraction, kind of more broadly.
Thank you, and for the question, and to be here, Dyani. I've been sitting here watching the slides, and of course, like many of you, I can trace the history of my relationship with Dyani through the works, and when I was introduced to it, and when I found it, and came to have a feeling about those works. And one of the things that I see, and last night I was walking through the gallery and really thinking about, many of you will see, there is consistently this presence of a line, this presence of what, to some, the idea of abstraction is the reduction of relationship, the reducing of subjectivity, and an emphasis on sort of, those art historical values of color and tone values. For Indigenous cultures, a line is an incredibly powerful graphic presence. It is created by the juxtaposition of one color against another color. You can see it here, the black and the white. The line is where those things come together, and that's how that's read. From an Indigenous perspective, that line can be a multivalent mark that in the genius of our ancestors can be made by a child with all the same meaning as it can with an elder who may understand that knowledge and layers that we will always be learning, we will always be becoming. I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, but I was raised in the Choctaw culture. I am always becoming Choctaw. I was born into it. I was born to be that, but I am growing in knowledge in a manner that will never end until the day that I embrace all knowledge, right? And that line for our cultures and for our ancestors, it embodies the whole of our philosophy. We have cultures on this continent that use a horizontal line to bisect that relationship in all of our graphics, that is the sky above and the earth below. And every time that horizontal line is used, whether it's what color, this color, that meaning is always there. And then you emphasize that through bilateral symmetry, by quadrilateral symmetry. And these are the forms that give our cultural identities a way of marking us to one another, to other tribes. When we see each other wearing things of our cultures, we can recognize what philosophy, what worldview that a person brings with them to the conversation because of those lines. And it is the line that is created when two bodies are pressed up against one another. It is the line that embodies the relationships that we have between ourselves as humans, ourselves within the world. And what's so beautiful about the horizontal horizon line is that it embodies the sky and the earth, and it is in that space where the sky and the earth come together that we as humans can exist. And without that horizon line, we don't exist. You don't have that horizon line on other planets within our solar systems. It's why there is not necessarily us in other places. This is unique to us, and it is the place that the Creator gave us to be human. And as we take that kind of knowledge that can be so simplistically visualized, I understand why European cultures that had these hierarchies of different kinds of philosophical thought that we were primitive. It was because of the genius of our ancestors to make it so that knowledge is accessible at every age, from the time a child can make a mark. I have a 20-month-old granddaughter who has already started marking the world. And so she makes that line, and she's very, it's a crazy line, but it's beautiful because she's already embarking on that mark making and that space making, and that she's becoming a part of understanding. She really loves blue, and we're making her dance outfits next year blue because that's what she loves. These relationships bind us together through our cultures, and not uniquely my culture, Dyani's culture, Candice's culture. It is that collective, and it is that respect through these relationships that I think is visualized in Dyani's artwork. It is that respect of uniquenesses and the value of who we and what we sitting on this stage, what Keith represents through his knowledge, what I do, what each of us does. It is all bound in those relationships, and it is such an beautiful thing. And in order to bring that kind of complex knowledge and world perspective into the job of being a museum curator, it is very complex because, forgive me, because I have a great love and respect for the Walker. The Western institution of curating makes me as a curator an authority, and I reject that. I may know something, but the depth of the knowledge about anything that is made by a community rests in that community. And you may have read, I work at a museum called First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City. You are all invited. We want you all to come. And one of the things that we've been building there is a curatorial practice where our role as curators is to bring our creativity to bear and to be able to abstract that knowledge in a manner that the guests who come through our museum, we have a huge Native population in Oklahoma, very diverse. We have 39 tribes. That's 39 Genesis stories, right? That's 39 languages. And that each of these brings a worldview that has an incredible depth of value to humanity. And we've created a space where we can work as curators and share that authority. We don't take away our authority, because part of our authority is that we have to work with the budget and the schedule. We have to make sure that work is on the wall, that things are designed, that it emulates that culture. And some of these communities don't have their own museums, so they're not accustomed to that abstraction into a space for all audiences to engage. But we have to take that genius of our ancestors and say, this is what we can bring. This is how we can bring your culture and your language and your thought into this space, and make sure that people coming in will feel welcomed and feel engaged, and hopefully out of that work be able to want to learn more and gain respect for why we need to be seen as independent, unique cultural systems, as all of that. The work and strength of that is in Dyani's work, and it is something that I have had a long love for, and I'm so grateful for.
Yeah. Thank you, Heather. Yeah. I think Dyani also invited all of us just so we could listen to the brilliance of everyone here. So I'm grateful, Heather, for what you shared. And I wanted to circle back to this idea that this is more than an exhibition, to make the point, and I'm going to make it a bit more crudely than you did, Dyani, but that is that I'm sure when you were invited to have this exhibition, you said, this can't be about me, this has to be about my family, and this has to be about my community. And this is what you're demonstrating to us, because I think sometimes museums think that the best way to do things is we uphold and uplift the so-called genius of individuals. But we would never be here doing the work that we're doing if we didn't have our community, Dyani. And you did the opposite. You invited your family and your community to speak first. And Keith was part of that community. And one of the things that was so nice to hear is this long relationship that you've had with Keith and Keith's work. And I don't feel like I can adequately describe that relationship. So Dyani, I was wondering if I could lean on you to share your relationship with Keith and also why you invited Keith to be a part of this conversation. And I know it means a lot to you to have Keith here.
It does. So just to quickly frame for all of you, because I know the catalog just came out at the opening of the show, so y'all haven't read it yet. But the four of us are contributors within the catalog, and so is our dear friend Mary Bordeaux, who's sitting in the stage. I kind of just want to be like, let's pull another chair up. And Keith is not a contributor for this publication, but Keith has been a generous contributor for previous publication that was in correspondence with the Idle-Jorg Museum Contemporary Native Art Fellowship. And I had received that fellowship, I don't remember what year, but I had asked Keith to write for me. And even though, because I'm going to have two paths of thought here, so I got to try and make them merge. I want to have everybody in the catalog. I want to have everybody at the opening. I want to have everybody in the exhibition. Last night when we were all gathered together, I said that the Walker hasn't, like the staff hasn't said no yet to the things that I've tried to bring together for this exhibition, and it's true. But now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, the only times they've said no is they're like, we only have so much money to pay so many people. So we can only have, you know, and the book can only be so many pages because it costs money to, you know, so we've had to have some no's in regards to how many people I could have contribute within the catalog, or how many voices we have brought in to help fill out the presentation of the work. And so I hope that this, I answered your first question a little bit more vaguely, but you know, I hope that you guys are able to take the time, because we have 4 video monitors within the exhibition that are community members helping fill out concepts, Lakota philosophy and worldview and Native perspectives on the practices that are in the exhibition. And then there's 4 audio guides. I had a much longer list than 8 people, and Keith was on that list because the reality is I can't present Lakota concepts, philosophy, understanding worldviews. It's not a singular perspective, and they're not my ideas. It has to be something that comes from community. And it's generational knowledge, it's communal knowledge, it's relationships, it's those that have supported us, those that have helped us learn and understand, those who have nurtured us and raised us. And Keith has been an important part of that journey for me within the artistic realm. So Keith and I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts together, and although I'm older, right, by I think maybe by quite a few years, but he was ahead of me in the trajectory of school. So he was graduating when I was coming in, and I got to see his BFA exhibition, and it was phenomenal. I still, like, I can remember where the pieces were hung, Keith. I remember the works, and I remember seeing that work and being so moved by your practice and the way that you were speaking to history, to U.S. history, to U.S. tribal government relations, to who we are as Lakota people, to you're a exceptionally gifted artist and painter. But Keith is also an extremely intelligent mind and a generative heart, and you lead with heart, and he's grounded in community and who he is as a Lakota man. And although Keith could, if he wanted to, have a phenomenally successful artistic career, and you do, but what I admire about you is you choose to put so much energy into community, and you curate, and you bring people with you, and you uplift youth, and you uplift artists, and you're constantly gathering. And that's why I wanted your voice here today, because I respect you as a fellow Lakota artist, as a painter, as a curator, as a community member, and as a relative.
I don't know if there was a question in that, so I'll definitely share what's in my heart. But of course, acknowledgement to all of you, appreciation to all of you as well, and deep appreciation to our relatives that this is their homeland, and this is Dyani's home as well too. I would say homeland as well. But so that's how I'm here. I'm here as a visitor, but as a distant relative as well. And I come here because, of course, Dyani reached out. And I would absolutely say yes, no matter what. But it's a bonus to be able to be flown in to see the show. Because as much as I do love Dyani and her artwork, it would be very difficult for me to travel from Western South Dakota via car over here and then to turn around and go back in time for work as well too. But I would have made the efforts. I definitely would. And I've been talking with Dyani about this exhibition for a while, ever since she began to conceptualize it and to already set the intentions for making it happen here. And I'm very happy that this is something that's available to us in our time to witness collectively. It's something that I saw last night as well too, and it's something that's being kind of, I guess, described here through this panel, that it's important to look beyond just the experience and the sensation of going to the gallery and seeing the work, seeing the pieces on the wall, seeing the pieces in three-dimensional form, but to actually be a part of that actual synergy that is almost like a conceptual work of art, I believe too, that comes from the mind and the heart and the spirit of Dyani as an artist, to make it a point to show that community is very instrumental to her, I guess, love, passion for what she does as an artist, but also how she wants to promote that she understands that that's what art provides as a vehicle, maybe for well-being individually, but definitely for the synergy of all of us, that we all have the potential that we can engage in an art experience that moves us to the point that we might leave with a different kind of being. I think maybe even an attitude for sure, but I think that it's about how we are reflecting ourselves. That's the way that I'm kind of compressing all of my experience last night. It was overwhelming. It was beautifully overwhelming to see all the work and to see all the people and hear all the voices in the space. But I know that now that I've had time to sleep on it a bit, I can start to feel what that impact meant to me. But I'm sure many of you also carry that same feeling as well too, which is why you maybe came here today with some excitement and really some more continued like sinew of wanting to be a part of this this moment, to not let it kind of end too soon. And I'm sure that it's going to continue on as we leave from this moment here at the panel discussion, where we venture upstairs again to see the artwork, have more conversations there where we can share our voices personally, our own stories. And that's the beautiful just privilege that I think art presents, is that we can change a moment to make it more individual bliss, or something where it really is intentionally driven as we need to make connections. It's about this transference of energy, our intergenerational connections. You know, whatever you want to call it, it's all of that. But I think that it's just another reminder that art needs to have dialogue, needs to have some sort of facilitation to allow people to feel like they can be a part of it. And not just to only be thought of as, where is your place in this? Which I think is something that was also critically thought of last night as well too, as far as what is an institutional hierarchy and what is available to Native communities as far as what's welcoming or inclusive, of letting them feel like there's a place that's for them as well too. And so it's a big moment. It's very important. And I've said this already to Dyani personally, but I want to make sure that I publicly announce it to everybody as well too. It's very important that this exhibition is being available for us to witness collectively together, and to take back with an encouragement, especially to our tribal homelands, to consider like what could be next. You know, who isn't here, who should have been here, and to consider how they can still take advantage of what this opportunity is presenting to them. Because it will shift the minds. It will, I think, lead to the actions that are just, they're on their way. They're here now. And they're gonna start to empower more of our curation with our artists, our creatives, our people, our community, our relatives, whatever you want to call them, they're going to have that ability now to like really define what is the spaces where art exists for them, and how do they want to share that, or how do they want to challenge that as well too. So there's nothing of a big knowledge that I'm providing here, but just a simple kind of just appreciation, but also an encouragement that comes from a Lakota heart.
Thank you for sharing that, Keith. I was thinking, and I don't know if this resonates with you, Joyce, this idea that I see in your practice, Dyani, that the stitch is also a suture. I think it's also a suture in terms of the way that art histories and cultural histories have often been written in parallel, as though they weren't on a shared path. I think that your work, Dyani, confronts that, sometimes head on, sometimes in a way that invites in these conversations, sometimes in a way that asks the question, why? And in many ways, I think, especially in these works that I was thinking a lot about in 2015 to 2020 that you were making, you were kind of holding a mirror up and saying, and I know we had these conversations, like why, when I'm looking at this, this Rothko painting, am I seeing Navajo weavings? And it's because that's what he was seeing. And Joyce, I know this is a deep history you've engaged with, also as an art historian and as a museum director. I wondered if you can reflect on the work that you're doing to kind of talk, or not just talk about, but I think enact how these relations have, in the past, I think, been seen as quite separate, but are starting to, that's really starting to shift.
I'm incredibly grateful to be sharing the stage with you all. And I think, some of you might be asking why the director of the Clifford Still Museum is sitting up here. And I'm here because also Dyani asked me to join us. And I had the pleasure and the honor of sharing the stage with her when she had her survey exhibition that the Kemper had organized that was at the Denver Museum of Contemporary Art. And it was a conversation about abstraction. And I think one of the things that I love about Dyani's work is that when you're talking about relatives, you're talking about your Lakota relatives, your Native relatives, but you also make space for your relatives in the kind of Anglo-American sphere, and also making space for a mode of abstraction that I think can be so variously kind of interpreted. And the relationship between, let's say, mainline capital A art history and, this kind of long-standing practice of abstraction that undergirds so much of the cultural practices that have kind of grown and refined and have transmitted over, all of these generations, that those two seem to, again, to your point, not inhabit the same space. But I think in your work, simply because of the kind of like, frankly, just glorious, glittering beauty of the works, someone walking in as a total newbie and completely ignorant of the deep histories that these forms invoke. And I have to admit that I was one of them, that even standing in the face of that and knowing that there is this gap that I do not understand, that I do not really comprehend, that there is enough space for me to come and be close to it. And I am, by training, I am from a different world, sort of, in a lot of ways. I'm an immigrant. I came to the States when I was 7, and I became a Germanist. So I'm actually, worked on interwar Germany, which is a strange place to be working. But there's something relevant, I promise. You know, I was working on all of these philosophers, scholars, and artists who were grappling with a world that was quickly being rent apart. And it was being rent apart because of the very logic of its cultural systems, the very logic that imposes and demands that the particular conform to the universal, that we subject it to that logic, and that we just simply demand that everything be mastered and dominated. And so when we talk about this thing called the Frankfurt School, you know, people like Adorno, they sometimes become this, you know, stand-in for Western theory, thought, whatever. But for me, it is a group of people really trying to understand how we got there. And so one of the things that they were most concerned about is really about like the status of knowledge. And if we have the structure of these relationships between how forms and beauty and aesthetics and all of this stuff is arrayed to serve our human needs, it's great. But when it isn't, then it becomes a war machine, and it becomes something that's really quite destructive. And so one of my favorite descriptions that Adorno has for the proper comportment to the other and the proper comportment to the work of art, and those of you who know Adorno by reputation might be surprised, but he calls it a snuggling up to. And the word in German is great. It's Anschmiegung ans andere. And I love that. But I bring that into this context because, you know, again, I come from a different context. But the work that I see you do in making these artworks that are absolutely, you know, they are stitched with the kind of time and the relationships, the kind of, you know, your conception of tradition is not fixed. It is innovative. It is responsive to the kind of introduction of other materials, other values, other forms, you know, other prints. That it's a practice that, you know, again, you take these things and you lend them this kind of amazing lived specificity. But the way that you also engage with the kind of vast histories of abstraction out there, it's not a kind of, this is okay, but that's not okay. This is, you know, this is pure, but that is not, you know. That it's actually this incredibly generous gesture of opening a space up to invite those who are as yet ignorant, you know, to come in and be invited to try to snuggle up to these works, you know. And snuggling up to is not mastering. Snuggling up to is not dominating. Snuggling up to is being drawn to something that you might not know or understand, and you also know it's not you, you know, and giving that person, that thing, that work enough space to allow it to have its own history, its own families, its own relatives. But to kind of get us to a place where we can, in that kind of curiosity and in that kind of love, you know, start learning that language, which is what the museum has done, you know, which is what I find so beautiful.
Yeah, kind of, I mean, I want to respond to everybody, but I guess what I'm excited about, and the reason, I just want to preface by saying a little bit, I could just do the panel discussion about talking about why I love all of these people that are up here. But what has been delightful for me in having being able to work with you a couple times now. And I got to go to the Clifford Still Museum in Denver and get a tour by Joyce and learn about her work. And your story is so beautiful in the fact of your own personal lineage, and then your arrival to now being the director of the Clifford Still Museum. And Clifford Still is such a phenomenal painter, and one of our canonical easel painting abstractionists within the history of Western art history, and that's the academic world in which you were brought up. But and thank you, that's true. You also recognize that it's a really flawed way to tell the history, and your position in who you are through your own embodiment and your lived experiences brings you to that space, having tremendous respect for that history and that lineage, and also knowing that there is tremendous room for growth in how we carry those histories forward. And I heard that in you, I saw that in you, and I also have tremendous respect for the history of easel painting abstraction and all of those artists who, I'm pushing back against this history, but I value this history as well. I'm a product of this history as well. I went to tribal colleges, and I went to graduate school in mainstream academic spaces, and I've done my best to learn. I'm not a historian, so I don't know as much as you do. I don't even know the artist that you're speaking about. But I'll go home and learn. This is what I've been doing, But I just so deeply appreciate, and it will take all of us collectively knowing that we can have more interesting conversations, deeper conversations, more fruitful conversations if we're actually digging into those intersections that haven't been played out in our academic and in our exhibiting spaces yet, right? There's so much more room for learning and for thinking about the histories of peoples and how they have arrived to a certain space, and really coming at that from understanding that artistry, and for me, I focus on abstraction because it's my favorite place to play, but artistry is a human practice. Abstraction is a human practice. So once we start getting rid of all of these hierarchies, we can actually have much more beneficial conversations. And I just am grateful for you because you've been able to, Joyce came to a talk and we were doing our best. We were doing this, right? And then she raised her hand at the end and summarized the entire discussion in 2 sentences. And I was like, oh, I need her to write for my book. Because it was her perspective of, you got it, you saw it, you understood it, and this kind of cross-cultural nurturing is what's going to get us forward. So I'm grateful for that.
I would have never thought of Adorno as ever, well, I know he wasn't writing it in English, but using the word snuggle or snuggling. Number one. But I wanted to share another kind of pivotal moment for me when I was engaging with your work, Dyani. And maybe this will resonate with Heather, and Keith, and Joyce. So I was visiting Dyani, I don't remember the year, but you were working on the largest paintings you had made to date. And you had your first kind of large enough studio, I would say, but you were having a lot of anxiety because you still only had room to work on one big painting at a time. Mm-hmm. And what Dyani had done, and to me it was extraordinary, and it was also deeply appealing. So if you know anything about people from the Northwest Coast, we love copper, love it. It's not only our bank, it's our wealth, it's the thing that we covet, it's probably the thing we dream about, it's the thing we put in the eyes of, our metaphorical ravens. And Dyani, as the undercoat of this new series of works, had painted them all entirely copper. So I was seduced from the moment I stepped in the door. But then what she did was, that was one of the first times she started overlaying that with these loom beaded strips. And for me, and some of them were, triangles, some of them were, this way that the top of moccasins, known as vamps, became part of your work. And I thought, okay, this is something else now. Because this isn't a representation of quills or beads through paint anymore. This is the layers. This is also bringing that thing that many of us have adorned ourselves with and putting it right on the canvas. But it's also, I thought at that time, this critique of the way in which art, capital A art, as Joyce and I have been talking about too, has liked to create these categories of what they considered to be capital A art and not art. So I would say a lot of modern art history has been deeply engaged in that practice, I think because it just showed that there were a lot of anxieties in the people who were kind of writing those histories. But then I thought, okay, here we have you bringing in that language of the thing that we have adorned ourselves with, so that if someone came across you, they knew where you were from. We, in the Northwest Coast, we wear our clan symbols on our clothing. It's so you know where we're from. And here, I think for Horse Nation people, that's what the parfleche bags also communicated. But here, what you were doing, Dyani, is you're saying the way that we've defined art has been so categorized that this language out there that we were adorning ourselves with was never part of this language here. And that was a huge shift. And I would say that that's a shift that's beyond abstraction. But all of a sudden then, this wasn't a kind of metaphorical representation. This was that exact depth that you see right there. So I was curious if anyone wanted to respond to what that is, because then, and this was the kind of third revelation, is when you made this extraordinary painting that was at the Whitney Museum of Art in an incredible biennial called As Quiet as Is Kept. And it was the entrance point to what the curators called informally the kind of light floor that was all about light. And it was the first thing that you saw, and it was entirely beaded. And to me, that was, and I don't ever like to use this word, but it was truly a masterpiece because it did all those things at once. So I don't know if Heather or Keith or Joyce want to respond to that, because I think that it's changing how we understand abstraction. It's changing how we understand Native histories of abstraction. It's changing where we consider where we find art.
I'm going to jump in because I love that piece. Like, not that I don't love all of your work, Dyani, but that piece, like, even last night, like, you had to walk up to it, not just to walk into it. At the Whitney, you walked out and it just like was right there. And I remember knowing that your name was, you were included in the show, and I think we had maybe texted or something, and you were like, yeah, it's a big piece, you know? And I walked, and I had gone through the shadowed room, and I had seen Raven's piece, and that was the first thing. And I walked out, and like, there it is, Oglala lineage. And I just like, it catches my breath thinking about it now, because it was beadwork representing generations of women, beadwork representing the labor that we invest in the way that we take care of our families and loved ones in dressing them. It was the use of designs that are so rich. And Keith, I hope you might think about that, talking about that a little bit, because I am not the one to speak about that, but knowing that there was just such like this, like the beauty of our Indigenous designs that have been passed through generations is that they have this capacity to flex into the moment and then immediately draw you all the way back to the moment of creation when the creator thought to make us human. And these designs do this, and that piece did that, and it grabbed the air out of my lungs when I walked up to it. And I think I even texted you immediately, and I was like, oh my God, what have you done? and then I was texting, and I'm like, is that gold? Is that copper? What is underneath there? And I was like walking around it, and it broke barriers that existed before that moment. And it didn't matter. It doesn't matter if you understand like how beautiful the designs are. I don't care if you don't know. I hope that you might think to ask. And I think the best artwork, it's not going to answer all your questions, but it's going to get you to ask smarter questions, you know? And that piece did that. And I know that it was not accidental that it was the first thing you encountered when you walked onto the floor of light. That's not an accident that it was on that floor, because it was so much about just like draws in these phrases that we have all been raised in the art history canon of like the Age of Enlightenment and all of those things that also are a way of people taking knowledge and weaponizing it. And the placement there, it cut through all that. And it created a space for just love to fill the room. And there were other fantastic Native artists that were included on that floor. Dwayne Glader is the one that comes to mind, and his teepees. And I do believe that there was another one, and I'm sorry that I'm not thinking of what it is. But it was funny because I walked through, and sometimes I have training as an art historian. I'm a lousy art historian because I know a lot, but I don't love it all. And there's a lot that I really don't love. And I was walking through the Whitney, and I was just like, I'm glad I found that first, because if I'd had to go through everything else to get to it, I think I would have been very disappointed in their thoughtful placement. It filled you with love as you walked in. And then you could embrace the rest of all the installations, which were quite good, right? Like, I'm not criticizing the artists or their work, but that love was already grounded through that work and the way that the space was held by it. And then, of course, there's the conversation about the idea of values, right? I'm going to stop there because I want somebody else to contribute.
I don't know, Keith, I see you don't have the microphone, but I think we're all looking at you.
No, I'm happy. I'm happy to share some thoughts, and I'll keep them brief. I won't go on and on. But that personally, yeah, there's stories attached to that piece. Wopila lineage. It is a masterpiece. It's I won't define it, but I will give it a respectful acknowledgement. It is a Lakota masterpiece as well too, and I say that because it represents more than an art form or a medium. It really represents, I guess, a presentation of self and being, I guess, how even Dyani told me when she was going to premiere it, that it was unapologetically Lakota. And so really what I take from that is that it is really like confident, but it's very sincere. It carries these values, but it's really humbled in a way too that you want to be very visible. It's a massive presence, but it's also very sincere and very, I think, it's hard to describe more so than just like it comes from a complete place of heart. And in Lakota culture and lifestyle, we have a belief, and they call this, in a way it's thought of as shaiichia is how you say it in Lakota. It translates into painting oneself red or painting yourself red. And so there's cultural context involved with that, what purpose that does for the person when they have to paint themselves red. Others, and I've heard this brought up into our more like contemporary history, where elders would talk about, first thing I do in the morning, and this comes from grandmothers and grandfathers, they say, we wake up in the morning, we start combing our hair. That is the first act of shaiichia, is to start taking care of ourselves so that we can present ourselves accordingly. And it's not to be, I think, selfish and arrogant in any way that you want to like look better than anybody else. It's just that you're carrying yourself with this identity, that you're not just only being seen by the physical eyes of your society. It's also transcendent eyes that are viewing you as well too, ancestors' eyes possibly. And so that's still carried today, and that's something that I'm guilty of not always adhering to. When I'm on the road, I always feel very shabby because my other half, my really loving wife, she usually braids my hair. And I don't do justice to it myself, so that's why I trust her. But when I don't have that ability to look my best, and I sometimes feel like I still have those voices of my relatives saying, remember your Lakota out there. And so that's exactly how that piece appeared. And I know that it's beyond that. It's not just only that as well either, but I know that it carries all of these different relatives who had these moments in their time. They now have that opportunity to say, like, this is what we were doing it for all since the beginning. And I do see it as an adornment. I mean, I do think that any of your work that is featured in any space, especially within the gallery context, is an adornment to them. And I feel like they really have, I think, accepted that. And they feel like that's also how they have now a connection to you, but also a bit of your identity. So that's awesome. You know, that gives them an opportunity for them to, I think, really feel like they can be seen as their best as well too. But a personal story as well, when I was visiting that piece, because I got a chance to go out to New York and to see it in person, and it was a great another opportunity that just, you know, these doors that open up that you never would expect. And then we were with the staff from the Smithsonian, from the New York Center, and we were having a good conversation, and they were all in very much big support of your work as well too. But there was a woman standing there, and she was just, I think, a person who wanted to go and view some art that day. She wasn't Native, but she had a real deep, just like desire to talk to somebody about what that painting meant to her. And so I stood there for long enough because I really wanted to like have my own personal engagement with it. But I think she felt enough courage to then talk to me. And she said, do you know this artist? And I said, yeah. I didn't say like, here, look, she's in my phone contact. I didn't do no humble brags or nothing like that. But I said, yes, I absolutely love this artist. She does great work. She said, I'd have no words, but I have to say something to someone. And she's like, I've been here a couple times now, and I feel like this is who I am. And so I was like, I didn't ask her more. You know, we had a good conversation for a while, but I just thought, you know, those are, again, those opportunities to, even as an artist who can be self-centered, to just remove myself and have this person share their appreciation, and then to also talk about like what this artwork meant to their life. And so I don't know if I ever told you about that, but I had to relay the message. Yeah, but I could go on and on about that piece and other thoughts, but I want to hear now from the rest.
You make me cry again. Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. Do you mind, Candice, if I... No. I want to... I'm just thinking about a few things in regards to that work. It's if you haven't been in the exhibition yet, or you don't know what the piece that we're talking about, it's 8 feet high by 14 feet wide, and it's nearly entirely covered in beadwork. And it was, before that, the largest piece that I had made that incorporated beadwork was 4 feet by 4 feet. And so that, I want to just say a couple things. I see at least 4 of you, but there might be more, no, 5 of you. There might be more because I haven't looked at every single face that's in here, but anybody who helped work on that work who's sitting in here today, could you raise your hands, please? Don't be shy. Get it in there. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. Whoa, Pila. And then I want to call out my friend and my dear relative, Tom Jones. Because I wouldn't be working with bugle beads if it wasn't for you. Tom is a painting professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and was one of, along with John Hitchcock, who's sitting here as well. And I got it both, yes. both were on my MFA committee, and both were really important. One of the big reasons I went to UW-Madison was because there was Native instructors there, and because Norman Akers told me that's where I needed to go. Norman Akers, who was our painting professor, I'm gonna reveal myself here. I didn't even know. Norman asked me if I was considering going to graduate school. And I quite literally told him, I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about that. I didn't realize that after I got my BFA, I could even go to get an MFA. And it was cousin Norman, and then he told me where I was going to go. And because he believed in the program and he knew you all were there, along with Nancy and Truman, And so he was like, you should really go to Madison. I grew up in Madison. I was not trying to go back. And I told him, no, Norman, I don't want to go to Madison. And he was like, no, you really should consider it. It's a really strong program. Just consider it. And so I was like, okay, fine. I'll put my application in with Madison along with other places. And then I went and toured, and I met all of you, and I had such faith in the painting department. Everybody that was in the painting, TL and Derek and Chelsea was there. And then I got there, and my mom was like, this is where you're going. And she knew, and I was like, yeah, okay, Mom. But it was true, and I wouldn't be the artist that I am today without all of you. And Tom and I have maintained the strongest friendship. All my good friends from grad school are my faculty. and Tom, we are fellow bead lovers. So we bead hunt together. We go bead shopping together. We text each other about beads and our scores and all that. And I was using seed beads because that's what Lakota people do. We love to lane stitch. We love to use seed beads, and I was using those in my work over and over and over again. And Tom was like, "You should try bugle beads." I was like, "No, Tom, that's not what we do."
You're trying to speed things up.
I know. He was like, it'd be faster. And I was like, I'll think about it. And so I reluctantly did, but then I finally realized that, that the line of the bugle bead looked like the line that I was painting, that referenced the porcupine quill work, that referenced the lane stitch beadwork, and it all spoke to each other. So if it wasn't for Tom prodding me, like half the work that's in that exhibition wouldn't be there. So, Wopila Tonka Tom Jones. There's other things that wouldn't have happened without Tom's prodding, but I'm deeply grateful for you always, and for your support, and for every single person, all of you that have helped make that work. But that's what that work is about. That work, the word Wopila is our expression for the deepest form of gratitude, but it's also a practice. It's an offering. It's the way that we honor our relatives. It's a gifting practice. It's a reciprocity practice. And so the title for that piece is really about my sincerest Wopila to our ancestors for providing the lineage that Keith and all of us get to participate in today. We didn't have it without them, without their brilliance, without their resilience, without their profound creativity in the face of such challenging, horrific, violent histories. I mean, we have such profoundly artistic communities. It's phenomenal. We have so many artists. There's an entire field of Native arts that has been built within from us because we didn't have support from the outside community for so long, but you can thrive and live and make a living totally within that field. And many people do, and it's an honorable place to be. And so we, that is what the Wopila is an expression to, is just this all of those that came before us and the relatives and the lineage of every single one of you that helped make that work, that brought you to that work. Jenny, you're here with your mom, you know, and you both helped with that, and your sister helped later, and that's your whole lineage is in there too. Tom's relatives helped bead the work. Like this is all family and connections, and it was that work was made to do just that, you know, to offer that and hopefully this tremendous moments of joy for any Indigenous person to walk into this space and see their lived experiences celebrated and reflected in such a unavoidably profound way in that space. And to do it, like you said, Keith, unabashedly, because we've been taught that our work, because it's been categorized in other ways, it's everything but art with a capital A, that it's something, oh, we got to do something else if we're going to show up in those spaces. You have to do something that's contemporary art. You have to do something that's beyond what you've been taught. You have to do something that's not you have to do something that's not design. You have to do something that's not craft. You have to do something that's not women's work. You have to do something that's not self-taught. You have to, you know, that's what we've been ingrained and taught, and we internalize it even if we don't believe it. And so it was actually really scary for me to create that work, because I wanted to show up doing all those things that, you know, we're been taught to believe we shouldn't be doing in those spaces.
But can I jump in?
Yeah.
and then you did it in the format.
Yeah.
The huge, huge monumental format of what the abstract expressionists would describe as the mural format, you know, and to kind of seize that format, which those painters also looked to, you know, the great Mexican muralists as their inspiration, that you seized upon a format that allows us to stand together in admiration of an artwork, because it is too big to fit in anybody's living room, you know? Like the mural format was never destined for a domestic audience, you know? I think it really allows us to kind of be reminded of, you know, I think we have an image of abstract expressionists as being so obsessed with their own individual achievement and their own individual genius. And I think actually by basically inhabiting that space, taking over that space, and also taking over that format that is already laden with so much meaning, you actually allow us to approach that body of work from another vantage point. And I also think that you normalize a way of thinking about great artistic achievement as communal, as needing the kind of support of all of your relatives to actually produce this work. It actually allows us to go back and say, these great men, you know, how did they achieve their glory? And the truth of the matter is, for somebody like Clifford Still, you know, who gave him his great opportunity in New York? Well, Rothko introduced him to Peggy Guggenheim. Peggy Guggenheim gave him his great exhibition in New York, and then, you know, got represented by Betty Parsons, and then Dorothy Miller at MoMA gave him his big exhibition. It actually allows us to remind ourselves that when we talk about genius, we're actually talking about people who make work so extraordinary, like that the woman that you talked about, so extraordinary that we're moved to come up with a language to describe why it moves us. It moves us to invest in a platform to show this work. It moves us to change our institutions and the parameters of our institutions to accommodate a new way of being together. And I think, again, like the decisions that you're making isn't just elevating a set of practices and materials that have been devalued, but actually kind of like in this amazing, in the act of making it manifest, you actually allow us to bind all of those things together.
Thank you. That's the hope.
We don't like to do things short. So just sharing that the invitation again that was made at the beginning, if you need to get coffee or need to go to the restroom and come back, we've got a little bit more time, but I have one final question before we turn to the audience. And Joyce, you gave me the perfect entry point because it was what I was thinking about, but you said it more beautifully. I think, you said that works like this, works like Oglala, really create the impetus for institutions to change their own parameters. That's what this exhibition, I think, is doing at the Walker, and Mary's nodding, so she's in agreement. But what I want to turn to all of you, Keith, Heather, Joyce, Dyani, as experts in this, now there's a community obligation that's been set up. This is not a one-time thing, obviously. If it was a one-time thing, then I think Dyani would hold the Walker's feet to the fire for as long as you live. And so would your mom. Just saying. Because this has created a community. It's invited a community in. It's invited people to share things that haven't been shared on these stages before, particularly last night. And, turning to all of you as people who've done this in your work, in your field, what is the responsibility now to maintain those relationships? I'd say not just for the Walker, but how do you do it in your own spaces, in community spaces, in museums that you direct, in institutions that you come in and transform? Dyani. Well, Heather's done this kind of, I said this in the introduction when we had our kind of little brainstorm about what we're going to talk about. I said, well, Heather's single-handedly changed the field, and she's going to be very humble, but she has, especially in the work that she does at this museum.
First of all, that's way too big of words, so I'm going to just use my simple words and just try to come to this with something thoughtful. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the history of museums and Native people, and so I'm going to do just a very brief description, because I think a lot of audiences coming into a contemporary art museum and you see this beautiful work, made by you, made by others, and it fills the space with love. And, we're all here in a relationship sharing this moment, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm so honored to be here. I'm so excited to be here. But coming into museum spaces, it's important for audiences to know that these are spaces that have been spaces of violence against our Indigenous people since the beginning of institutions and exhibitions on this continent. The concept of museums comes out of the accumulation of war trophies by dominating cultures that came and took things from our community and took them back to Europe. This is something that informs my work, because as a young child going into museums, I encountered things that were made by my relatives that I had never seen before. I didn't know they were there. And the labels were so impersonal and so antagonistic in a way, as if whoever wrote them. And as a 12-year-old finding my great-grandmother's cradle board at the Denver Art Museum, I even had the thought to myself, because 12-year-olds are thinking people. Their minds are becoming adult. And I recognized this person had no idea who my great-grandmother was. And at that time, I did not think I was going to work in a museum. I didn't even think about it. But that moment informs my work today, because museums can be spaces for social justice. Mm-hmm. They can be sites for healing. but it is the people within the museums who have to make a choice to want that. And the legacy we've discussed of the inheritance of all of the great contemporary modern, right? You go backwards, right? Contemporary and then modernists, and, you know, all of that history that is present in museums, that even when you are looking at contemporary art, that space is violent for us as Native people. And it has to take an intentional choice. Every day we are the product of the choices that we make. Our day is the product of the choices that we make. And institutional spaces, the people make those spaces. The staff here at the Walker are making the space for you. Every single day, that staff is coming in and making an intentional choice for what the audiences are going to have. And that is complicated because also they're human. I'm human. My best days, they are not all the same. There are days when I go in and I am exhausted from being in the ER overnight with a kid who, whatever, you know, I'm just, you know, you go in and you're exhausted and your personal life informs your professional life. But it is a choice in that moment to make things good for the people with whom you're going to come into contact. And it is challenging, it is exhausting. But also one has to recognize that there's a long history of that violence. This space we were discussing earlier, if I may, this space, this land has a history of violence against our Indigenous people. Not my relatives, but my relatives, because I love these people. And it is their history. And thinking about that, and that piece, the grasses, 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 I don't know if that's about that story, but I gotta say, like, we were talking about that, and yeah, and just the cutting blades of grass, right? And that history, if you don't know this history, again, I'm asking you, ask a smarter question and go find out about it. It is not her job to teach you that history. It is not the artist's job to teach you everything that you need to know to learn. But go and find out why a painting about grass is an act of social resistance. Go ask, go find out, and learn that. And then you'll understand why Keith has made a career out of work that is constant reminders that we cannot take this space for granted. And it is the space where the museum workers, and myself as one, every day I know I have to share that authority to give that space for other people's voices to fill that. It is not my job to fill the air. It is not my job to fill your head with knowledge. It is just to create space for the community to come in and to be a part of it and to be in relationship with it and to foster those relationships. And I fail. There's days I fail. There's days I promise you my staff is like, oh my God, I don't know why I work for this lady. But I love them and I know they love me. And every day we try to bring our best to that. Whatever that best is, we bring it. But we bring it in relationship to one another. And I think it's that history in those relationships, right? Like, that's what we have to remember. That's what I heard Mary say last night as the leadership of this institution, is that the Walker is changed by this and is not going back. So you said that. You've put that into the universe. Nobody put those words in your mouth. And now you have that responsibility to carry forward. The universe now has heard you and will hold you accountable, as will the community, as will Dyani, because we're in relationship together that way.
Can I? Oh, go for the Heather. I just want to encourage the title "Grasses, Grasses, Grasses" is the title of a poem by our really dear friend Layli Long Soldier. Layli is also a contributor to the catalog, and the history that Heather's speaking to is the history that Layli is speaking to in that poem. And if you purchase her book titled "Whereas," first of all, my favorite, one of my all-time favorite books of all existence. She's one of the most talented people I have the privilege to know and to love. And but she does a phenomenal job of personalizing really challenging histories for all of us. So go get Laylee's book and you'll understand the title, Grasses, Grasses, Grasses.
Do you mind if I tell?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So, on the topic of just institutions and who they're built for, I think it's really something that we have to remind ourselves that all institutions are built by human beings.
Yes.
And that, things that seem completely immutable can always be changed. And, I run a very unusual institution. The Clifford Still Museum can only show the work of Clifford Still and no other artist in my museum, which seems a little limiting. But admittedly. But we do have 93% of everything he ever made, and so it's a lot of work. But, I invite you all to come to Denver and see the show on right now, which is called Tell Clifford I Said Hi. And it's been co-curated by the children of the Colville Confederated Tribes. And it's a Native American community that Still actually spent time with in the 1930s, when he spent 3 summers doing portraits and bringing his students from Washington State College up to do those, observations. And so we have this body of work that takes this community as its subject. Mm-hmm. And for us, we felt like it would be very important for us to understand the perspectives of the very community that he had made portraits of. And so for over 10 years now, the museum has invited the community to give us, just also help us identify, the individuals that were portrayed. And over the course of that 10-year relationship, we asked what it would look like for us to deepen our relationship. And so 3 years ago, the community asked us if we would be willing to do something with their youth. And so that's how an exhibition of a white abstract expressionist artist is being fully interpreted by children as young as 3 to, I think 12. And so we worked with 80 kids over the course of 3 years. And we also, every time we engaged with them, we also had opportunities for the children to learn from local tribal artists. And so, again, I run a very unusual institution, but this exhibition, I think, also takes inspiration from the work that you have done, that institutions like the Walker are doing, to really kind of take seriously the power of art to knit us together. And so that this body of work is not just significant for the art historian, but that this body of work is significant to this community because they see in those faces their actual ancestors, and that this can actually be, this body of work that was made that takes this community as their subject, actually can be converted into this, this mechanism or this resource that enables this culture to connect more fully with itself and its own history. But, I share this in part because I think institutions can always find space, make space, and insist on the transformative power of joy. It really is, this is work that has to stand in the harsh light of truth. You have to do this work in recognition of the actual things that have happened. But in standing in that light of truth, there is also the possibility of the kind of recuperative and reparative power of beautiful artworks to unify us and to kind of infuse it all with this amazing light of joy, which is precisely what I find so moving about your work, Dyani.
I just want to say one thing, then we're going to turn to the audience. Big takeaway from, I think, what everybody is expressing tonight is, and for me, what I'm been trying to share with people, not only through the work and through the way that we're structuring the exhibition, all the way that we did last night, the way that we there's blankets and pillows, and we raised the heights of the benches so that our elders can get on and off the benches. We brought Dakota language teachers in here to teach Walker staff how to greet people in Dakota, and that they would feel comfortable doing that. We encouraged people to be engaged with people that as they come in, to make sure they don't feel like they're being followed around like at a store, that they feel like they're being welcomed, supported, acknowledged, honored for being in these spaces. All of the programming that we're doing, we're really working with community members widely to create really engaging, powerful public programming opportunities. I want to point out Sierra and Oogie as really important supporters of this exhibition, two Indigenous women that have helped shape everything that we do with this exhibition, and I'm really grateful to the both of you. We have just worked very intentionally, even the length of this panel and the 4 people, and doing things, just pushing, because the reality is we get to make the choices, to what you said. Yeah. Like, there are models that have been established so far, and we get to decide where and when they don't serve us anymore. And we get to decide, oh, wait, so this is the way it has been done, but how are we going to do it now that we've learned this? You know, how can we do something that is now, it's time, it's open, we've got the right leadership in place that is willing to do these things with us, that is willing to dig in and do the hard work and be self-reflective and grow collectively. You know, but we get to make those choices. We're always like, oh, panels are only an hour and a half. I was like, no, we got 2 hours. And why not? You know, like, and it's okay if people go to the bathroom. Bring your kids. Like, I mean, we can make all these choices ourselves, and so that's and I think we get stuck with what we're used to, you know. But like, we can make those changes because we are all humans collectively doing this work together.
Yep, absolutely.
I love, Dyani, how you said in about 2 minutes all the institutional change that needs to happen at most museums, and you just rattled it off. It's pretty extraordinary. And because one thing that was on my mind, I also direct organization. We don't use the word institution. We say organization or association, called Forge Project. And one of the things that we're trying really hard to do right now, and I think we're succeeding in some ways, one, it's an Indigenous-led organization. It's buying for Native people, but we're trying really hard to make it feel like an autonomous zone. And we're trying really hard right now to make it feel like it's not part of the United States. And I'm also Canadian, so I think I can say that sometimes a little bit too. I have a bit of a past. But the reason I'm saying that point, Dyani, is because, you know, we talk a lot about territory in our work. Often you talk about it. And I think you've made this, if not Lakota territory, feels like Indigenous territory to me. And that's pretty amazing. And you did it through all of those things, and all of those things that you just shared here at the end, like even how people are greeted, you know, that's so important. People don't feel welcome, and they don't feel greeted in the way that they should be greeted, then this space isn't going to feel like it's for them, honestly. And that maybe sounds like a simple idea, but why has it been so hard to put into action? So with that, we have, I think, time for 2 questions from the audience. There are microphones. I see a hand up there. Yeah, right there.
Buju, Wabin, Indigenous. Hi, my name is Wabin. First and foremost, I want to say, on behalf of my family, our community, and everyone else, we are so proud of you for doing every single thing that you do to bring everyone together. When we were sitting around talking the other night, you had mentioned that your mom hadn't come into reconnection until she was about 35. I have the book, but as you saw me crying my eyeballs out, or I have a hard time with pushing myself to read without crying every 5 minutes. But my question is, while she was 35, you must have been in the throes of coming of age, maybe around 16 or 17. That is a pivotal moment in, our youth, and I'm curious as to, with your mother's reclamation and reconnection, how has that impacted, the youth that you had prior to your understanding and the learnings that came post reconnection, and how has that impacted how you view the world, as well as how it impacts your work, and what have you learned from yourself in that? Thank you.
Thank you, Wabin. Man, we could spend another couple hours talking on this topic, so I'm going to do my best to summarize. But Wopila for bringing that up, because okay, big history short. My mom was born in Rosebud and was adopted by missionaries who quite literally used the language. They felt they were called to work with the Indians. And so they moved to Wisconsin. And so my mom, along with a third of all the other Native children in that era, were a part of what is now referred to as the adoption era, or the 60s scoop. The removal of Native children from Native families was a very intentional strategy, and it followed up the boarding school era. And that very intentional removal and efforts towards assimilating Native children, removing them from their families, from their cultural structures, from who they are as Native people, the goal was assimilation. The goal was to be rid of the Indian problem. And so my mom grew up, unfortunately, a lot of adoptions can be loving and nurturing, and a lot can be violent and extractive and abusive. And even the loving and nurturing ones can also be extractive and can also be extremely harmful for the person who has been removed from who they are. So my mom made her way back. My mom suffered a lot in her childhood, and in her youth then fell into self-medication. And in her effort, her journey towards sobriety, it was in that moment, as she was healing, as she was going to AA and digging into her finding and learning her own wellness. It was in that stage that she realized that a big part of her pain was this disconnect from her family. And so she was reunited with our family, and I would have been 12. So I have a vivid memory of knowing that I was Indian without having context to what that meant. I had a label. I knew that I was. It get called out in school from time to time or in other environments. But I didn't know what to do with that, And then my mom, to her credit, did everything in her power to make sure that we were connected to our family in who we were as Lakota people, so that we didn't have to suffer the same disconnect she suffered. So we went back to Rosebud as often as she could muster. And my mom was a single mom with, on food stamps and housing subsidies and disability and all these things, but she got us back as often as she could, and to spend time with our family, to get to know our relatives, to be close to our cousins who are at our, some who are at my house right now, and came and have helped make the work and have been a huge instrumental part of our lives, because my mom made sure to. She knew it, she felt it, she lived it, she saw it. She wanted to make sure we didn't have that. Part of that has also been by situating us within the Native community where we lived in Madison. And Joanne has been a part of that journey, as have many of the other beautiful Native community members within Madison that helped raise me and my brother. Intertribal community members. And I didn't get to, I'm going to use this story to illustrate this. Because my mom was reuniting and relearning and had to, then she had to enter cultural knowledge and learning as an adult. I was a kid, but she was an adult. And that's, God, this is such a long conversation. There's so much that's in that. But I didn't go through, because I was a young teen and all of that, my learning was also stunted. Like, I started at 12, you know what I mean? I started at 13. I was like, it's like being a baby when you're not a baby, and as far as your knowledge goes and your understanding goes. So the story that I feel like illustrates that most is that, I didn't participate in our womanhood ceremonies. My mom wasn't there yet that I was able to go through Ishnati, but my daughters did. And when I sat at the table and I made her moccasins and I made her dress, and we all sat together and we made everything that she needed for that ceremony. Her dad helped. She worked on it. We worked on it. And I remember crying at the table and being like, they didn't win. So it's a huge part of my practice, because people need to understand that when we talk about history, when we talk about the violence that Heather spoke to, that Native people have survived, it's not history. It's our lived experience every goddamn day in different formats, different ways. And it's our families are still reveling in the fallout of all of this, and it's constant. It's constant, and it's today, and it's present, and it's continuing. The Alaskan communities that just got hit with typhoon, and the legislation that made sure that they didn't have protection from climate crisis. The legislation that was just yanked, the funding that was just yanked, that made sure that thousands of Hopi community members weren't going to have electricity. I mean, it's ongoing, and so just being a person that has, like, my personal story is so affected. Who I am is so affected by that history that it's embedded in all the work, So thank you for asking that question. I'm sorry, it's a long explanation, but appreciate it.
That actually brings us to the end, Dyani. Don't apologize. Don't apologize, because I think we are all here because of you, because of the strength that you've offered, and the strength of your family, the strength of your mom. And I want to thank you deeply for that. And I want to thank everyone who shared words, Heather, Keith, Joyce on the panel, and to thank the Walker for this space, and to thank the organizers. And I think someone's going to come on the stage and share that there's coffee as well for all of you.
Yes.
So thank you all.
Wopila Tonka to Dyani, to this brilliant and generous panel. And to all of you who have gathered here in this space with us, and those of you who are online, and to our ASL interpreters from the Indigenous Interpreters Organization. My name is Megan Leaf-Flad, and I and my team, which includes Ugi, Ikwe, Sophia, and Vanessa, do public and community engagement here at the Walker. And we have had the honor to work alongside Dyani in our community to develop moments to continue to gather, to be in conversation throughout the run of this exhibition and beyond the walls of the museum. And I have a few invitations for you all as we conclude, one of which is hopefully there is still coffee left. But that is up in the Bazinet lobby. So after we close this moment here, you're invited to join us. You're also invited to the gallery for this beautiful overwhelm that Keith spoke of. We're open till 5 tonight, but the exhibition runs through February, mid-February. And then we want to continue. Dyani talked a little bit about some of the programming we've been working on, but there are many moments for us to continue in the next 5 months. We don't have to let it end too soon, as Keith also said. And so I invite you to check out some of the related programming you'll see here. There's chances to be together to make. There's chances to be in conversation, chances to learn. Tom will be back, Tom Jones, Laylee Long Soldier, Jovan C. Speller, so many other people, Talon, Leah Hale. As you have noticed, Dyani does not travel small. She brings everyone, and so we're really excited about everyone joining us back here in that space. And this, I think, to Candice's last question, the challenge of this work as we continue. So we hope that you'll join us as a museum staff and organization as we explore those things. So Wopila, and we're going to let these folks take a break, but they're going to come up and meet you so we can continue this conversation if you'd like.